Well, after all these fascinating talks and all that great food, I hope that you're feeling very inspired and energized and your brain cells are really firing, because my talk is actually about how watching those brain cells firing might be the very answer that millions and millions of children and their families have been looking for. So just last week, a startling announcement was made in the press about one of the most confounding and controversial disorders, autism. I'm sure you all know something about autism. It was revealed that the incidence of autism in the US has increased from 1 in 150 children to 1 in 91 children in just 5 years. Now, the overwhelming consensus amongst most experts in the clinical and research fields is that one of the main reasons for this sudden 40% increase in the number of children with autism is the overdiagnosis of this disorder. In other words, children who might previously have been diagnosed with other disorders such as attention deficit or mental retardation, and children who might demonstrate even slight impairments in their communication or social interaction are now being labeled as autistic simply because there is suddenly such a heightened awareness about this disorder. So this press announcement sparked a nationwide debate on one fundamental issue. How reliable is the diagnosis of autism or any such developmental disorder? And how can we start to treat a child safely and effectively unless we are sure of the true nature of his or her disability? Now, it was an uncanny coincidence that the findings from this government study were released a few days before this talk, and that the issue of autism diagnosis suddenly garnered such immense interest and concern in these last few days. Because nothing I could have said could possibly have proved more convincingly than this press announcement the need for a revolution in the way that we approach and diagnose autism and many other children's disorders. And my talk will share with you a groundbreaking new diagnostic technology that may quite possibly have started that revolution. Before I proceed, I thought I might quickly explain what I mean by developmental disorders, since they encompass such a large variety of disorders that affect about 1 in 6, that's 1 in 6 children in this country. Which means that each and every one of you in the audience today is either related to or knows at least one child suffering from a developmental disorder. Now, developmental disorders are brain-based disorders that occur at some stage in the child's development. They usually cause retardation of their mental or physical development and often cause permanent mental or physical impairments. The disorders include mental retardation, learning disorders such as dyslexia, dysphasia, language disorders such as aphasia or Landau-Kleffner syndrome, attention disorders such as ADHD, autism spectrum disorders, sensory processing disorders, epilepsy and seizure disorders, sleep disorders, genetic and chromosomal disorders like Down syndrome and Williams syndrome, disorders from drug misuse during pregnancy, and disorders from brain injury before, during, or after birth. It's estimated that 17% of children in the US actually suffer from one of these developmental disorders. Yet, despite all the advances in medicine and technology, the diagnostic approach to these disorders remains woefully inadequate. Currently, children with developmental disorders are being diagnosed solely on the basis of their observable behavior. For instance, a child is usually diagnosed with autism after a single psychological assessment, which often lasts just 1 hour. Based on this very limited diagnosis, the child is then prescribed strong medications or expensive therapies, which very often prove virtually ineffective. This misdiagnosis and overmedication leaves the child's real problems untreated and left to exacerbate, and compounds the frustration and desperation of the parents and the child. I would like to share with you the story of 2 such children who came to my clinic with a diagnosis of autism. They had tried a plethora of treatments and therapies to no avail, and their parents were deeply disillusioned and extremely desperate. Like all the parents that we see, they had two fundamental questions. Can you find out what is wrong with my child? And can he or she ever realize his or her true potential? What you will now see is footage from a news item on Good Morning America about our groundbreaking new approach for diagnosing these two children, and indeed hundreds of children like them.
Come on, let's have some breakfast. Let's go to school.
Breakfast.
Yeah, breakfast. Come on.
Breakfast.
Beckett Kavanaugh.
Do you like a small world or Space Mountain? It's a small world.
Justin Senegar. You'd never guess just a few years ago, both boys thought to be clearly autistic. Justin often zoning out and Beckett barely speaking. Parents told they were pretty much beyond help.
They just watched him play in a room with a little kitchenette set and some stuffed animals. And from that, they deemed that he would be autistic.
He may be on the spectrum, on the autism spectrum.
And she recommended that we see a speech therapist.
I heard everything from a resident at UC telling me he would never advance beyond the intellect of an 18-month-old, to the school district telling me that he would probably have to have a companion the rest of his life.
But their diagnosis and their prognosis was wrong, shockingly wrong, primarily because they had based their diagnosis entirely on one short behavioral evaluation. Diagnosing a brain disorder by looking at behavioral symptoms alone is analogous to treating a heart problem based on physical symptoms without ever looking at the heart. If a patient comes to an emergency room with chest pains, the first thing the doctor will do is take a chest X-ray and an ECG to look directly at the structure and the function of the heart, respectively. No doctor, I hope, would diagnose a heart problem and prescribe heart medication solely on the basis of the patient's observable symptoms. So our groundbreaking new approach follows basically one fundamental principle. To diagnose and treat any brain-based disorder accurately, it's crucial to look at the brain. Looking at behavior alone, which is currently the norm, often misses a vital piece of the puzzle and provides an incomplete or even misleading picture of the child's problems. Moreover, when looking at the brain, it is important to go beyond just looking at its structure and looking at its function. This is because in a substantial proportion of children that have developmental disorders, the structure of the brain is intact, but the function is severely compromised. If a brain-based diagnosis of these disorders is ever conducted, it's usually limited to an MRI scan. Now, while MRI technology provides a very accurate picture of the brain's structure, it doesn't really reveal any information about the brain's function. So children with developmental disorders can often present with perfectly normal MRI scans, leaving their real problems undetected. Which brings me to what I do. I specialize in a pioneering brain imaging technology developed by our research team at Harvard University and being used by my clinical team at Bright Minds Institute to look directly at the working brain and diagnose brain disorders more accurately than ever before. This is done by measuring the EEG, or electrical activity of the brain, in real time, allowing us to watch the brain as it performs various functions, including visual, auditory, attentional, and language processing tasks. The EEG scans that we record appear as a complex pattern of waves that are carefully examined to detect any abnormalities such as spikes or abnormally slow or fast waves. Two features of our technology make our EEG scans cutting edge and unique. The first feature is called brain electrical activity mapping. It allows us to locate the exact source of any abnormal EEG activity in the patient's brain. This is done by running various mathematical calculations on their EEG data and then running computer algorithms to display the results graphically on 3D maps of the brain. The second feature is called statistical probability mapping. It allows us to estimate whether the EEG activity in the patient's brain is outside the normal bounds for their age. This is done by statistically comparing their EEG data to a reference database of normal EEG data for that age. Our reference database has EEG data on over 2,000 normal, healthy subjects, ranging in age from newborn infants to 70-year-old adults. For each test, the statistical difference between the patient's EEG and the normal EEG group is calculated, and then this difference is plotted on the brain maps you see on the screen. The patient is considered to have abnormal brain activity only if that statistical difference exceeds a certain value. So this groundbreaking EEG technology allows a thorough analysis of various brain functions and enables a much more accurate detection of any significant abnormalities in these functions. When this EEG technology was used to re-diagnose children like Beckett and Justin, the results were astounding.
It turns out Beckett almost certainly isn't autistic. He has a brain seizure disorder that can seem like autism, especially because his seizures are impossible to see with the naked eye.
Boy, eggs?
You do? What else?
You need to be careful.
Anti-seizure medicine brought astounding results.
I cut the apple.
Within a period of, 60 days, his vocabulary went from maybe 2 to 3 words to about 300 words.
Research does show that as many as 50% of children diagnosed with autism may be prone to hidden seizure-like activity in their brains.
There doesn't seem to be any regular rhythm.
Our EEG scans revealed that Justin was also suffering from these rapid brain seizures, undetectable to the eye, that were presenting with autism-like symptoms. Once the true cause of his symptoms was finally identified and treated with anti-seizure medication, his level and speed of recovery was equally remarkable. In fact, he was transformed.
We noticed that his language was developing and he was able to be more expressive. And it was very exciting for us, very, very exciting for us.
This EEG technology can be used even before a child has learned to speak. So it enables a much earlier diagnosis of seizures and similar abnormalities. Since a child's brain remains moderately elastic until about 12 years of age, the earlier the detection of such dysfunctions, the quicker the intervention, and the more effective the remediation.
Indeed, Todd and Paula remain plagued by pictures like these. What they thought was daydreaming, almost certainly seizures. Why didn't the neurologist they saw when Justin was 4 suggest looking at his brain?
I feel like we've lost out on a lot of time and a lot of development for him.
Time, that's the one thing we can't get back, no matter what. We can't get those years back to try to... I need to take a break.
But so many days now, they get to feel like ordinary parents.
School free!
School free!
Watching Justin's face full of joy as he leads the class pledge,
Let's go!
an accomplishment unthinkable just a year ago.
Most of the children you're going to see on the screen were given an original diagnosis that our EEG scans found to be partially or entirely inaccurate. Many of these children were diagnosed with autism, but were actually suffering from the silent seizures that were just described, which were causing their language regression. Some of these children were previously diagnosed with attentional disorders, but were found to have a severe deficit in auditory processing, which was causing most of their behavioral problems. And a few of these children were previously diagnosed with mental retardation, but were found to have excessively slow brain waves, which was causing them to be slow and unresponsive. Once their underlying brain abnormalities were finally identified and treated, almost all these children showed remarkable improvements in their symptoms. I do not suggest that these EEG scans be used as a replacement for neuropsychological tests, but that they be used in conjunction with these tests. Because these EEG scans are revealing information hidden within the brain that could never have been obtained by any behavioral assessments. As a result, these scans are enabling us to provide a more accurate diagnosis, more targeted treatments, and more finely tuned therapies for these children. For too long, children that have had developmental disorders have suffered from misdiagnosis and over-medication. Their families have suffered undue frustration and desperation, and society as a whole has absorbed the escalating costs associated with ongoing therapeutic services, drugs, and other imprecise remedies. We're now in a new era of neuroscience, one in which we can finally look directly at the brain and find the source of so many brain-related disorders. If I could inspire even a fraction of those in the audience today to share this pioneering diagnostic approach with one person whose child might be struggling with a developmental disorder, then perhaps one more puzzle within one more brain will be solved. One more mind will be unlocked, and one more child who has been misdiagnosed or undiagnosed by the system will finally realize his or her full potential while there is still time for their brain to recover. And all this by simply using an EEG scan to look inside that child's brain. Thank you.